we'll go on to a new topic called exception handling. Now, you might have dealt a bit with exception handling in your earlier programs where you were inputting data. Exception means an unexpected event that occurs during the normal execution of a program. An unexpected event happens and then the normal flow cannot be continued. You say an exception has happened. Now, for the normal flow of the program to happen, you should be taking care of the exception. Taking care of the exception, you tell it to be exception handling. So exception handling is the process where you catch an exception and make the normal flow of your program to continue. You call that exception handling. Now, why do we have exception handling? Very simple. To maintain the normal flow of your program, you should be having exception handling. Now, when we talk about errors in a program, there are two kinds of errors which can happen. One is called compile time error. Now, compile time error, a very simple example is, let's say, you give an SOP. Okay, you give an SOP statement. Like, let's say, hello world. You give an you give an SOP statement called hello world, and you do not end it with a semicolon. That particular error will be caught by a program during the compilation process itself. Such an error, you call it to be a compile time error. When in the compilation process, the compiler tells, this is the error. The object cannot be found. You have missed a semicolon. Okay, your brackets are missing. You do not have such a program name. All that come under the category called compile time error. Now you have another category of error called runtime error. Now, runtime error means you can successfully create the .class file. You may be able to create the .class file successfully, but your program may not run properly. Okay, it can be due to many problems. For example, the very simplest thing is, imagine you created an array of size 5. You created an array of size 5 and you are trying to put in a value in the 9th position of the array. It is impossible. But there is no compilation error. There is no problem in the syntax you have written, but logically it is wrong. Your array size is only 5 and you're trying to put in things into the 9th position. Such kind of an error, you call it a runtime error. Imagine you're doing a division. You're trying to divide something by 0. It will not happen. It is a division by 0 error. Okay. Imagine you're trying to create an object of a class which is not there. A class not found. Again, that is a runtime error. Imagine you're planning to give an array a negative number size. That is a runtime error. So all those category of errors which make your program not to run successfully, you categorize it under the runtime error. Now, in exception handling, or to catch an exception, hope you remember what is an exception. An exception is nothing but an abnormal activity. Something abnormal, you call it an exception. Something abnormal. It actually need not be an error. Something abnormal, you call it an exception. Now let's see what all are the tasks in exception handling. The first thing is you will have to find the problem, get the problem, understand what is the problem. You call it hit an exception, hit it. You will have to first hit the exception. Once the exception, you know what is the exception, you have to inform your program or the main that such an exception has happened. Okay, you say you will throw it. You will throw it out. You will throw it out. You will throw it out to your main, and then you'll have to catch it. Okay, you can envision it like, Nidhin, you're having a ball in your hand and then you're throwing it to me. You're having a ball on your table. You find out the ball. You find out the ball. You get hold of the ball. I am in control of the class. You give it to me. I receive the ball. I catch the ball, and then I check whether that ball is a defective ball or not. If it is a nice ball, yes, I'll play with the ball. If the ball is defective, I'll do some corrective mechanisms. You call it a corrective action. You call it handling the exception. So these are the things which happen. You should be hitting the exception first, finding it out. Then you should be throwing it. Throwing it to might be a main or whichever function you have. They will catch it. The main will catch it. And then take a corrective action. You call it handling an exception. Taking that corrective action is called handling exceptions. Okay, now this is what happens. You try, okay, if things happen or not, you then try to catch it. So those are the keywords which we normally use. You try and then you catch. Okay, now this is how it happens. You will have a try block. You might have already encountered all this when you did your data input stream. Whenever we had data input stream, we were going through all this. Okay, you will have a try block and you will have a catch block. Now, the statements which might give you an error, you're not very sure whether they'll give you an error or not. That's why I've written here that may cause an exception. You're not very sure whether it will cause or not. It could, it might. Okay, all those kind of statements, you put it into your try block. You will put it into your try block. You're hitting it over here. You're hitting it over here. You're trying it over here. You are throwing it out. You are throwing it out. And that thrown thing, it comes into your catch block. You hit it over here. And then you throw it. You throw it to your catch block. And here you will do the handling. Here you will do the handling, exception handling. Okay, so I'll go once again. You hit it, you throw it, you catch it, you handle it. Okay, you hit it, you catch it, you throw it, and then you handle it. This is how mechanism of a try catch block works. Now, these are the three major things in exception handling, or the three kind of exceptions which might happen. The three kinds of exception which might happen. One is checked exception, unchecked exception, and even we might have an error exception. This, please do not confuse it with your runtime error and compile time error. You call this an error exception. So the three kind of exceptions which can happen in Java are checked exception, unchecked exception, and error exception. These are not compile time, runtime error. These are error exceptions. Okay, we'll go one by one. Now, first we'll see the difference between a checked exception and an unchecked exception. Please have it down. Now, the things I've marked in blue, they come under the category called checked exception. And the things I've marked in red, they come under the category called unchecked exception. First, we'll talk about checked and unchecked. After that, we will talk about error exceptions. Okay. Now, we will talk about checked exception. Now, be it whatever exception in Java, it will be from the throwable class object. Throwable class object. Now, checked exception means, of course, they will be an exception or some error scenario in your code. Directly when you compile the program itself, it will come onto your face. When you compile the program itself, you will get it as an error message. It will come onto your face. You can ignore it. You can very much ignore it, but it isn't a good mechanism to ignore exceptions. You have to take care of these exceptions. Now, usually these exceptions, these checked exceptions, they can be handled by the code. In the code itself, you can handle it with the help of a try-catch exception. Sorry, try-catch block. These are exceptions which you can handle with your try-catch block. Now, in the throwable, you will have a class called exception. And these are a few examples of such kind of exceptions. For example, IO exception, SQL exception, malformed URL exception. Then another thing is you can even have things like, for example, checked exception. You can have arithmetic array out of bound. No, array out of bound comes over here. Math exceptions, all that will come over here in your checked exceptions. Okay, are you getting an idea? Now, all the checked exceptions, they will be specified in java.lang exception. java.lang exception, all the checked exceptions. Okay, that is why I have given a box over here called exception. From the throwable, you will be implementing the exception, and all the checked exceptions, they will come under java.lang exception. java.lang exception. Okay, now I will talk about unchecked exceptions. Now, all the exceptions which come directly under throwable error and the runtime exception of exception falls under the category called unchecked exception. Now, unchecked exceptions, you will find it in java.lang runtime exception. java.lang runtime, this word. java.lang runtime exception. Now, these unchecked exceptions, you need not necessarily handle it in your code. The JVM, it will take care of it. The JVM will take care of it. Examples are, arithmetic exceptions. Okay, array exceptions, array out of bound, index out of bound, class casting exception, number format exceptions, all that come under runtime exceptions. Okay, the JVM will take care of it. Okay, you have a third category called error exception. Okay, all error exceptions come under the category unchecked exceptions. Now, error exceptions, there are two categories. Either it can be out of memory or a virtual machine error. These are the two error exceptions. Out of memory, these are the two categories: out of memory error or virtual memory error. I'll go once again. You have three categories. One is checked, one is unchecked. Everything coming under java.lang exception class object, they are checked exceptions. You should be handling it with a try catch. Everything coming under error under throwable and runtime exception of exception, they are categorized under unchecked exception. They will come under java.lang runtime exception. The JVM will help you to handle it. Then you have a third category, the error exception, which comes under out of memory error and virtual machine error. Now, if we go into detail, this is how things happen. the exception hierarchy in Java. You have the throwable object. You have two main categories. One is exception, one is the error. All these come under the